Imagine for a moment you have no choice but to run a marathon. Imagine further that you don't feel ready because during the past 3 weeks you had to walk fast over a desert for almost 300 miles. This has left you with some blisters and calluses, but at least you've lost some weight. That is a plus, but the night before you had to scramble down and then up a 10-mile wide valley that is 1,800 feet deep with the Egyptian army chasing you. You check your thermos of water. Great. It is almost full since you filled it up 10 miles ago. But now you're told that there is not going to be any water on the 26-mile course before you. Truly shocked, you are assured that there will be water available at the end of this 26-mile ordeal. So you begin to think to yourself, should I walk to conserve water? Or perhaps you hope you can travel at dawn or sunset to avoid the hot desert sun? Welcome to God's marathon of bitterness. The cure for bitterness. Let's take a closer look. My son and I were able to travel the entire 26-mile route twice. First from the shore of the Red Sea with Andrew Drones, and then the second time from the vast plain up over the pass down to where the legend of Marah most likely occurred. There's only one path that the children of Israel could have taken after crossing the Red Sea from Nuweiba Beach. After about 10 miles, this pathway opens up into a large sloping plain where most believe camp was made for some much needed rest. Another 8 miles away is a pass at 3,500 foot elevation. That pass has to be crossed to get to the water. Upon reaching the pass, Moses probably rallied the crowd by telling them the hard part was over. It was not far now. They had come 18 miles from the sea and no doubt had little to no water left after climbing 1,000 feet over the last 8 miles. Those that run marathons acknowledge that between mile 18 to 23, a runner hits a wall due to exhaustion, mental fatigue, and depletion of glycogen stores. In God's mercy is not to appear invidious. He planned the last miles of the course to be downhill. At that point, there was only one thing to do: sprint to get to that precious water that would be waiting. Wow, how disappointing it must have been to get there and then dip a cup into that water only to find it was warm, dirty, and tasted awful. This is the junction in Al Sharab. This great disappointment must have occurred in present-day El Sharaf. It is an important junction that 2 large eastern watersheds feed into. One of these wadis comes from Mount Sinai and Mount Horeb itself, another 40 miles by foot. If it did not rain a few days prior, there would not be a large amount of water that would retain and collect in this area. The Continental Divide is about 50 miles towards the east, and it is where most of the water would come from. We drove the present-day highway through this wadi and noted how it descends slowly with many channels that could bring water into this spot. It's still sloping big time, and you can tell there's lots and lots and lots of water, so it wouldn't be a problem. Despite desert conditions, there is plenty of evidence today that much water can flow through this area when it rains. We parked beside a retention pond under a tree at the lowest point in a proposed Marah site. For trees tend to be good markers for where water might lurk under the surface. In the story, Moses needed a tree or log. The elevation beside this tree was at least 1,200 feet below the pass, and it's a much lower elevation than the mountains eastward. To suggest that Marah must have been further down the long wadi that heads south to Elim seems less likely for several reasons. First off, God was leading this large group of people, and to make them walk further without water would go against 1 Corinthians 10:13. Second, rain is often a short event at high elevations, so the longer water has to travel, the more time it would have to be absorbed or evaporate. The large group needed a large area of water that was accessible on all sides. Downstream, the wadi seemed to have many wells, but there seemed to be less lake-like areas where water could collect. The mileage from the edge of the Red Sea to this location, if you don't cut the corner to the pass, is about 26 miles. If you do cut the corner, it is exactly 25 miles. This distance made famous in history when the first Marah-thon commemorated the run of the soldier Phidippides from a battlefield near the town of Marah-thon, Greece, to Athens in 490 BC. According to legend, Phidippides ran the approximately 25 miles to announce the defeat of the Persians to some anxious Athenians. Then he died. For the Israelites to survive this marathon to Marah says a lot about their physical condition and God's providence. Now let's talk about the water tasting bad, how it was bitter. When it rains in the desert, there's a lot of runoff since nothing holds the water. Minerals wash off the dirty rocks, wash through the sand, they wash plants. This runoff would contain lots of dust, salt, and minerals. The concentration of these solutes would increase further due to evaporation. One would expect any surface water at lower elevations to be dirty and poor tasting. One would not expect the situation in this valley to be different when drinking from surface water and not a well. A large crowd with animals would have to access water quickly, so lining up at a few wells would not work. Even the largest wells of the ancient world had very strict limits. A recent rain could have easily provided water here before it seeped into the ground.
There's enough water for all. It's even got little fishies in there. Unbelievable.
I got a piece like a...
Numbers 5, verses 17 and 23 gives the formula for bitter water. What they did was they'd take clean water, they'd mix it with dust from the tabernacle, from the floor of the tabernacle, along with paper and ink residue. This bitter concoction would then have to be drunk by the woman who was brought to the priest suspected of adultery. Another example, Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, wanted to be called Marah since her life was so bitter after losing her husband and 2 sons. That bitterness was then changed by the Goel or Redeemer Boaz through his love and compassion for Ruth. Bitterness includes many failures in life, from relationships, ill health, and having to suffer under sinful people. So Marah is about trusting God to take away our bitterness. The imagery of Moses taking a tree and throwing it in the water to make it sweet is that of our Savior choosing the cross for our salvation. The bitterness of ill health comes from breaking God's laws and statutes, as stated in Exodus 15, verse 26. John 10, verse 10 describes quite beautifully how Christ came into that water so that they could have life more abundantly. So God's Marah-thon started on the banks of the Red Sea, and it continues with all the ups and downs of our lives today. To drink the bitter water of life and then not only survive but thrive requires a Savior. It is then that we finish the race, as stated by Paul in 2 Timothy 4, verse 7. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. The last 7 miles of this race is downhill. God's Marah-thon ends with God's cure for bitterness. May your health, your relationships, and walk with God be sweet.